This is the first pocket we're learning. The double welted pocket is the common pocket with lessons that we'll keep using. I'm going to share at least a half dozen general methods and techniques to sew them over time, over videos. They're only slightly different based on what we need for jackets or inside pockets. This will be a long, thorough, detailed video to provide a firm foundation so that I can speed through or skip over certain things that I have already said and made very clear. Although also in this video glossing over things that I have already talked about. The ideal materials we want are wool suiting fabric and the lightweight cotton being Silecia. Both of these can be easily substituted for calico, but a wool suiting fabric and Silecia, which like I said is a tightly woven cotton pocketing fabric, are the best. Starting with the pieces we need. Out of our main cloth, we need a piece to put the pocket onto, which needs to be at least 21 centimeters wide and 15 centimeters tall. You can see the fold on my cloth here so that you know I'm working with the warp, drawing on an arrow telling us which way the warp or straight grain is going. Since I only want to see the same side of the cloth from the outside, I'm marking the grain arrows on what will be the wrong side or the inside of the garment. We need to cut 3 rectangles out from the same cloth. These are the jets that we use to make the welts and the bearer or facing, which is inside of the pocket. If the pocket opening gapes slightly, the pocketing won't be showing because the bearer is inside of it. It's called the bearer because sometimes we sew a button onto it if we have a hole and button closure. It bears the strain of the pocket. The welts will be 19 by 5 centimeters. We need 2 of them cut perpendicular to the grain of the trouser piece. This is the normal method and it's more aesthetic since it creates a purposeful disruption, I suppose. For the bearer, it needs to be along the same grain as the fabric that we put the pocket onto, for the same reason as mentioned earlier, that it covers the pocketing from the inside, so it looks continuous if the pocket gapes open at all. The bearer needs to be 19 by 10 centimeters. I've drawn them all at once to illustrate how the grain should be for each piece. The principle of the grain with regard to the welts and bearer or facings is always consistent among pockets. If the pocket is slanted, the jets will be on the straight grain. The bearer would still be the same grain as the main cloth, but a different shape to fit into the pocket. Finally, you need 2 19 by 30 pieces of our Silecia, or lightweight cotton, for the pocket bag. I'm going to sew a dart into my pocket piece. It doesn't need to be there to practice the pocket, but I want to start illustrating how to sew darts. Mark the center point on one long edge of your trouser piece and mark the point 1 centimeter both sides of it. Then measure perpendicular down 8 centimeters from the center point. Mark the lines going from this 8 centimeter central point to the 2 points you marked either side of the midpoint. To sew through the dart, fold the fabric over the center line and baste it in place. Not on the dart line though, and iron it as well. To sew the dart, I'll start at the top of the cloth. At the machine, I'll hold the excess thread as I move the top of the cloth into position below the needle. We machine down our chalk. It's important to taper the dart so that it becomes very slim as we approach the base of the dart. It absolutely mustn't suddenly curve inwards at the end. At the bottom of the dart, where the cloth is folded, we can keep machining off of the fabric. If we keep the machine going, we can leave 2 to 3 centimeters of thread there, and the coiled up thread will hold itself in place. Again, every time you finish a machine stitch, you need to be in the habit of snipping the loose threads immediately instead of leaving them, and that is the last time I'll say it. Press the dart as is first before opening up our trouser cloth. We'll often press the dart towards one of the seams, like the centre back seam, but for now I'll just press it to one side. Make sure the outside of the cloth is fully opened up and press the dart to one side. Once it's definitely sitting flat, we could also give it a press from the front to ensure the trouser is also fully opened to the stitching. If the dart seems to have marked on the outside of the cloth, then you can press underneath the dart and the mark should go away. From the front of the cloth, at the bottom of the dart, mark a 16 cm line perpendicular to and centered on the dart. Make sure that either side of this line is sharply marked. This will be our pocket opening. Copy the pocket opening onto the reverse of the cloth, again marking both edges. At each edge of the pocket opening, use a little 3x3 cm piece of fusing, which will secure the fabric and stop the little cuts we're going to make from fraying. To fuse the fusing, lay it onto the point that you're using it, in this case the edges of the pocket opening. Lay a piece of cloth over it and press your iron onto it for about 10 seconds without any steam or water, just the heat and press on it. Take away the cloth and it should be stuck there well and good. We need to reinforce the pocket opening as well. I've got a few options we can use. Well, I have 2 options, but if you want to use fusing across the whole pocket opening, I suppose you can. I have Holland linen. I also have Silecia that I might use on lighter materials, like less heavy materials, I mean. Silecia is much softer, while linen is much more like cartilage. They're not essential should you not have them, but I almost always use linen. Use a 19 by 5 cm piece and baste it onto the inside where the dart is showing. Center it and baste it over the line that you chalked out, making sure that it's even on both sides, on both the horizontal and the vertical. Next, we put on the first pocket bag. It must be centered on and run parallel to the dart, and the top edge should be about as high as the top edge of the sample piece. Baste it onto the trouser near the top and near the bottom. Now we are going to baste on the jets. Line up the first jet, top or bottom one, it doesn't matter, to the pocket opening, wrong side upwards, facing away from the sample piece. We also need the same amount of jet to be poking out either side beyond the pocket hole to be. Hence, measure how much is on either side of the pocket opening. Should you wish, you can put Silecia, linen or fusing over half of the jet, the half close to the hole by the way, and you'll end up with stiffer welts and a stiffer pocket. It doesn't have to be done, but it can be done should you wish. We baste the welts from outside of the 16 cm points denoting the pocket edges. Both the start and end of the baste need to be secure, like basically always, because we don't want the machine to push the welt to one side or the other, so definitely knot or tack the thread or both at the start and the end. We should also baste a little more than ½ centimeter from the long raw edge, otherwise we'll catch it in the machining, which would just be inconvenient because it would be difficult to remove. We could sew it with either a normal basting stitch or we could slip stitch it down. Having basted on the first, copy the chalk line marking the edges of the pockets onto the jet so that you can see when we machine them. Place the second jet up to the first, keeping either side even and making sure the long edges are touching without overlapping, basting it on with the same care in mind. To clarify, or to be clear, we are basting everything together at this point. And again, mark the edges of the pockets onto both jets now. We will machine 2 parallel lines of stitching to sew the jets and the pocket bag to the trouser. It's important that the lines precisely start and finish where your pocket hole starts and ends, or at the very least, the start and end of the stitches are on the same vertical plane. Both lines of stitching need to be 1/2 centimeter from the initial pocket hole that we drew, making the 2 lines 1 centimeter apart. They need to be very securely back-tacked so that the stitching won't come undone. When we finish the stitching on both, we need to check that yes, both ends are, firstly, parallel, and secondly, very secure so that the stitching won't pull out. As is usual, it is important to press the stitching flat first. You can remove all of your basting so far, not forgetting the linen basting, as I often do. Now cut open your pocket hole. Start in the center and make a small cut such that you can get your scissors in order to cut a straight line. Stop at least 1 centimeter away from the edge of your hole because we're cutting a mitre, a triangle. Move the jet out of the way. Do not cut the jet. Cut very precisely to the edge of the machine stitch. This allows the welt to be folded and lay straight. We want to cut to the inside of the stitch so that the cut is also level with the edge of the pocket opening. Before we move on, I'm going to mark a 1 cm seam on the bottom of the lower jet. We're going to iron this up. Start with either one of the jets and push it through the pocket opening. We need to press the 5mm seam allowances open between the trouser cloth and the jet. We can make sure that the jet is pulled all the way through, and we need to iron down the pocketing, the linen and the trouser cloth. Meanwhile, the jet needs to be pressed upwards. The 5mm seam allowance of the jet and the rest of it as well. Since it's so little to press, it can be very finicky, but it's necessary to do this neatly and properly. It needs to be fully pressed open along the stitching. On top of this, the portions of the jets on either side of the machining need to be ironed in the same way as well as the machined portion. So we need both sides to be pressed in the same direction as the rest of the jet by 0.5 centimeter, both pointing into the pocket hole from the stitching. It's also very important that everything else is laying flat. This makes it much easier to press the welt since everything will be more level and we won't have to press out any accidental creases later. Fold your second jet through and do the same. It's easy to undo the ironing you just did on the other seam when you do the second seam, so we could lay the second seam against the edge of a board with the first dangling off of the edge. To create the welts, one at a time, begin by folding the long end of the jets over the seam. We fold the jet so that the 0.5 centimeter seam allowance that's pointing into the pocket opening is inside of the welt. The seam allowance serves as a guide for the width of the welt. If we basted and machined the jets properly, we can fold the jets precisely over its seam allowance to be 0.5 centimeter wide. We can usually feel where the seam is inside of the welt as we fold the jet over. We have to do a baste on the welt to hold it in place before we fix it in place as well. We should start the baste close to the edge of the pocket opening and make sure it's secure. We'll do quite small basting stitches as we fold the welt in place. It's very important that we baste on the welt, not the trouser cloth. Done right, the basted welts will touch but overlap. You don't want any gapes either though. From the back we need to iron the welts again. Again, holding the sides either side of the pocket opening that aren't basted or machined down so that they are level and linear with the basted and machined portion of the welts. Slip stitch the welts together, this way they don't move one way or the other relative to each other. You also want to do this so that when you sew the mitres down your pocket won't be squiff and it generally keeps them together while you're doing the rest of the pocket. With everything sealed in place, we will machine the welts to the seam allowance. Fold away both the trouser fabric, linen and pocket bag. We are going to sew the welt cloth to the seam allowance that we ironed open that was inside of the pocket opening, which is currently a rhombus shape since we also cut the mitres. The basting on the welt will be close enough to the seam that it holds it in place sufficiently to move everything but the seam allowance and jet out of the way. With the seam allowance on top, we want to machine the two together. Start near the edge of the welt, close to where it's folded. We don't need to back tack since we're sewing through one layer, so it won't be pulled apart anyway. Start machining the welt, and then machining the welt and the seam allowance together. For best results, you want the stitch to be straight and as close to the first stitches we did as possible. When the welt cuts away back down to the machining because of the mitre, we will keep sewing just the welt in the same way as we started, trying to keep sewing in a straight line. We can basically just sew off of the welt cloth. We do the same to the other welt as well, trying to keep it straight across the welt. Very important staying on the seam allowance as close to the original stitching as you can. We can look at the double welts from the front and back. It should be unchanged from the front, and from the back there should be another 2 parallel lines on the welts. We'll move on to the mitres. The triangles on either side of the pocket should still be poking into the opening. Fold them into the pocket opening and make sure you are pulling them out taut. Fold the trouser fabric, linen and pocket bag out of the way, pulling those taut as well. Do make sure the welts aren't overlapping but are still touching. I slip stitched the welts together after I sewed them, but slip stitching before makes it much easier. Sew them together at the absolute base of the triangle, practically on the same line as the trouser is folded back, next to where the very first 2 stitches on either side of the pocket finish and or start. We mustn't sew anything other than the welts and the mitre. Sew over them at least twice. Realistically, we need to check from the front that the welts are properly set. We need to look at the edge of the pocket. If you can see a raw edge, then you likely haven't pulled the mitre taut enough, or you didn't sew close enough to the edge. If the edge is pleated or kinked, then you either pulled the mitre out too taut, or you sewed through more than just the mitre and the jets, and you caught the trouser as well. We can then sew the free edges of the welts together. They should be touching since we ironed them in the same way as the portion inside of the pocket opening, so we can just hold them together as we machine them together. It doesn't need to be particularly pretty, just back and forth a little from the mitre to the edge. We can do the exact same thing from the other mitre. Again, we can look from the front and back. The front should show a nice rectangle with double welts. The back should feature various stitches all going beyond each other, but all intersecting to create a good rectangle surrounding the double welts. On the second pocket bag, chalk a line 2.5 centimeters from the short edge so that you have a reference to sew on the bearer. On the bearer, mark a 1 centimeter seam allowance from one of its long edges and iron that up. Position the unironed edge against the chalk line we put on the pocket. Baste them together so that you can fell them together. Then you'll fell the lower jet that you already ironed onto the other pocket. We don't sew the trouser, just the jet in the pocket bag, so I put my ruler underneath the Silecia before I basted it. With the double welts facing upwards, or with the trouser right side up, same thing, we need to fold the trouser cloth out of the way so that we can see the perimeter of the pocket bag. Lay the other pocket piece onto the first, bearer side up, because it's going to be folded inside out. I suggest that it should be basted before machining, joining the two long edges and the short edge at the bottom of the pocket. Machine them together with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. When machining the pocket, there are a couple of options you can use. You can stitch at a perfect right angle in the corner and fold the seams over themselves to fold it out, or you can make it curved so that you don't lose lint in the corner. Here I'm just doing right angles because it's easiest for the first time. Remove the basting and press the seams. Something we can do is to trim down the edges slightly beyond the stitching so that all the raw edges will be trapped inside of the second seam. We need to fold the pocket bag right side out now. One thing you can do is to roll and push the seam into the edge, making sure it's centered and basting it as you go. You could also use a needle to pull on the threads, to pull them right to the edge of the two pieces of cloth. It's important that you're pulling the threads and not the fabric, because if you pull a piece of the weave, then you've got problems. Maybe not with trouser pocket fabric, but if you're doing it on the lapel of a jacket, and it's very important at this stage to iron the pocket bag, whether or not you've basted it. Now we're going to close the top of the pocket. It's no different if you put in a flap or a tab, you're just pulling the trouser out of the way and sewing about the same place as the other two times you machined the top of the seam allowance and welt. Sew your pocket seam closed with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance and remove the basting if applicable. At this stage, press the stitching again and now you're ready to finish the pocket. We're going to detack either side of the pocket opening. We're basically just reinforcing the mitres and the edge of the pocket opening. It's the weak point of the pocket. Something else you could use is using chalk, or better yet, a chalk pencil to draw before you start stitching. Moor the thread on the inside of the pocket next to where the jets start and or end. Send the needle through next to the corner. From the front, send the needle back into the cloth in about the same way, like a normal prick stitch. Then again, send the needle up to the front of the cloth, where you want the next prick stitch to be, sending our needle back down again through the same place, creating our pricks, shaping our D. It's fastest to pull the needle through towards the back only a little, and send it back up to the next location and then pull the thread through. Repeat this in a semicircle with about 8 total pricks to the corner. Then we should go across the welts as well. It's a reinforcement stitch, might as well reinforce the count. Plus, sewing across, we can clean up the corners if necessary. Push away any loose bits of the weave into the seam. The most difficult thing about this I've found is stitching good symmetrical Ds, but a general rule that I seem to have found helpful, you want about 8 pricks in the D. Fasten the thread onto the pocket opening again, doing the other side as well.